Now, recently, President Trump has decided to sign the border deal negotiated by Republicans and Democrats. Now, that border deal gives him far less than he wanted for a wall, and now, of course, he's planning to declare a national emergency. But before this happened, Trump apparently had called his friends over at Fox News to help with some damage control. Now, the New York Times reported on Wednesday that the White House had sought to minimize damage by tamping down on criticism from the right for what they called, of course, the most punishing defeat Mr. Trump has experienced as president. I mean, think of it this way. The Democrats had originally offered $25 billion for Trump's wall, specifically for wall funding, which is insanity. That is the extreme right-wing position, right? The extreme right-wing position is give him money for the wall, $25 billion. It would cost anywhere from $20 to $70 billion, by the way, to build a border wall, right? So he originally, rejected that proposal in his hubris, in his complete arrogance. Then he got crushed during the midterm elections and then tried for 5. He ended up getting 1. That is a massive, massive loss. When you get a lot less money from what the Democrats had originally offered you, that is a massive loss. That is a complete bungle. I thought he was a deal maker. He's a terrible deal maker, and we know that already. Now, after that colossal bungle and failure, he decided to call his friends over at Fox News. Now, one call was to Lou Dobbs. Now, Lou Dobbs is, of course, a favorite of Donald Trump. He always tries to watch his show live, right? And does some live tweeting. Another one was to Sean Hannity. Now, Sean Hannity, of course, regularly talks with the president, according to the Times. Now, what did he want them to do? He wanted them to salvage his public image as a deal maker by helping him come up with excuses and then actually going on the air and telling his audience that those excuses. So now what happened? Well, Sean Hannity, like a good little loyal soldier, he said, quote, "You saw a big change in tone." This is from CNN report talking about Hannity. He said, "You saw a big change in tone from people like Sean Hannity when he said he wasn't happy with the deal, but he believed the president would make some kind of executive action if he did sign the deal to avoid a government shutdown." Now, that's actually true. He actually did that. So I guess point for Hannity, right? And this was Trump telling Hannity, no, don't worry. Say this, and then I'm actually going to do an executive action. So here you have the media colluding with the White House. Oh, fascinating. Now, CNN's Caitlin Collins also reported that we learned in the 24-hour period that there was a slew of phone calls from the White House to people like Hannity and Laura Ingraham, as well as, of course, Lou Dobbs. 3 people out of the president's favorites telling him 2 things. One, that this was a loss in part for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Now, how was this Nancy Pelosi's loss? Well, a lot of progressives will rightly point out that, hey, man, she said no money for the wall. And she gave him $1.375 billion. That's a criticism. It's fair, but again, I think it's one of those things where, yeah, but they actually, Trump, it's a major loss for him because in the end, he got way less money than he asked for. And the whole, thing with declaring a national emergency, that's going to be probably tied up in court for quite some time. So that was the other thing that he was saying. Let's see. Let me get here. If the president does sign this, he will declare some sort of national emergency or take executive action to secure funding for the wall. And again, that's exactly what happened, right? Now, she continues. She says, right now, they are not saying whether the president's going to sign this. This was an older report. We do know that the president is signing this. And, he is, again, actually declaring a state of emergency. Now, the article also mentions that he reached out to Mark Meadows. Now, Meadows and his allies were among those targeted by the White House in hopes of avoiding a more threatening conservative revolt. And as we see, there was not as much of a conservative revolt, except for maybe Ann Coulter, who I talked about yesterday, and Tomi Lahren. Tomi Lahren got dragged on Twitter for this because apparently she wasn't the one that was in contact with the White House. And these guys, Ingram, Hannity, and Dobbs, they knew ahead of time because Trump had reached out to them. So, oh, here you go. We're going to give you actual information ahead of time on this, so you know that what we're gonna do. We're gonna telegraph it to you, and so you can go out and you can do damage control. So I guess it actually is effective because it did work, and it was actually what he was going to do. But now, could you imagine, right? Obama calling up Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and telling them, for one, don't be mean in the interviews, right? Be very soft, and also here's what we're actually going to do. So go out and say these talking points on our behalf, and then that makes us look stronger. When in actuality, what we had was a super weak deal. Could you imagine right-wing heads exploding if that happened? Of course. Now, of course, in reality, established media will defend their own, and they probably would have defended Obama anyway. But not without, but they wouldn't have had that inside information, because that's something that I don't think the Obama administration would actually do. This is literally planting talking points, right? Now, if you're an outsider like Ilhan Omar, however, well, you got to watch out, because any criticism is going to be met by calls of anti-Semitism. But anyway, that aside, right? Hannity, Ingram, and Meadows, as well as Dobbs, they're the biggest Trump guys that you can imagine. And so they were really worried about these guys going out and criticizing Trump for this terrible deal. So that's why, of course, they felt, well, we have to tell them what's going on. We have to do some collusion with them and tell them ahead of time this information, and so that they can go easy on us when they do their reporting. When you have to worry about your closest supporters criticizing you, well, then you know you're in real trouble, right? You know you're in real trouble. And so he knew it was a loss. It's a big one at that. And he knows that this emergency thing that he's doing now is basically the last thing that he's able to do to try to get funding for his wall. There is no other way. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.